Hello, folks. I am really excited to introduce you to Dylan McCusker. Dylan is the head of Tidbit Games. And Dylan, tell us about the game that you are working on currently.
So Crumbs is my first game that I've ever created. And actually it was published last February through Kickstarter. It was actually published sort of in 2019. It was funded, and then I spent the whole winter, the next like 9 months, preparing the game. And now I'm actually working on the expansion to that. So that's going to be called Crumbs Fowl Waterfowl. But yeah, Crumbs is a game for 2 to 4 players where each player takes on the role of a different army of park animals, cute little park critters, and they fight over zones within a city park, battling for breadcrumbs. And the winner of the game is the person with the most crumbs at the end of a certain number of rounds.
That's amazing. I watched the video. We're gonna like feature your trailer video in there too,
Uh,
and I just thought it was so funny. Like it had such a good sense of humor about it. Something
Thank you.
about gaping maws,
Yeah.
and you're seeing all these adorable little animals like chipmunks and
Mhm.
ducks and everything. Tell us a little bit about what are some of the powers that the different animals have?
Sure. Yeah, so that's kind of like about that trailer. It's like part of what we found is funny is just the dichotomy of those two concepts of the cute little innocent critters, but really they're like some horrible evil monster or like some really powerful force. And so getting to like kind of play around with those things is one of the funnest things about developing the game, including those unique animal powers. Um, so there are the ducks who can are the only ones who can score wet crumbs or crumbs that land into pond spaces. Um, and eventually, those crumbs that land in pond spaces of enemies will stockpile, and they can go get those. There are the chipmunks who create their own little stockpile, their own treasure trove. They hoard crumbs to themselves, and they get to score those every round. Um, and there are the squirrels who get to share spaces with other players and steal from them. They're kind of sneaky, and they are the only ones in the game who can actually like inhabit a space peacefully with another faction. And finally, there are the pigeons who are cheap and plentiful. There's just a lot of them. There's more of them than any other kind, and they are the cheapest to purchase their units.
That's awesome. How did you come up with the idea for the game?
So me and a friend, Jackson Berner, we decided we wanted to make some games, and we sort of listed out a few different like themes or things we wanted to work on. And one of those was pigeons. Was like kind of the starting thing. They're just such a like a funny, goofy animal that nobody really thinks about. Nobody really cares very much about them. They're not very important in the scheme of animals. You ask somebody what their favorite animal is, they're like an octopus or a lion or something like that.
Hmm.
Uh, so we just thought it would be funny to make a game about the lowly pigeon, kind of. Uh, and initially, that kind of started out as like, could it be messenger pigeons? What, like, if you're playing a game, what would it be? One of the main things I think about when I think about pigeons is like people feeding them crumbs on the side of the street or in plazas. So then we were like, okay, we can work with that. How about it's like pigeons fighting over breadcrumbs in a public space? And then it's like, oh, well, let's introduce some other animals that people feed in public spaces, just typical like parks, urban critters that you might find. That way we can introduce those sort of unique powers, unique factions, and that's sort of grew from there.
It's just such a clever idea and it's so much fun. What was your team like for building this game?
So it started out with just me and Jackson, and we designed the game. We used pieces from Dominant Species, and used that box initially. So the game's evolved a lot. It was just us two, probably like around 2016, right when we had graduated college, and we worked out of my kitchen and made the game work really well. Had to use our imaginations for the critters because we were just using these kind of generic shapes for them. eventually I was able to get I was able to laser cut those critters. Kind of if you look at that duck behind me, I was
Yeah,
able to like laser cut the outline of the duck and then like glue 3 of those layers together to make something more like meeple thickness. And
that
so
is
it's
so
just kind of,
cool. I love it.
yeah, ragtag put together. Eventually I invested in a 3D printer, which is much more affordable for consumers nowadays, and it has allowed me to make game pieces whenever I want. So it's super helpful. And yeah, it was just us two working on it. Eventually, after a couple of years, I brought it to BostonFIG for the first time, submitted it to the showcase, we won best in show for that, for the tabletop category, and then that sort of inspired us to maybe like move on. Maybe we wanted to branch off and actually like make it a thing that people could play. Um, at that point, me and Jackson sort of parted ways. He focused on other projects, and I took Crumbs to a point where I thought it was viable to like actually give to consumers. I hired an artist who I was roommates with in college. So we were very close, could talk about, concepts and stuff super easily because we lived in the same place. Got all the art done, or some of the art done that I could afford. And then, yeah, it went from there. Just ran a Kickstarter, did all the things.
That's amazing. So are you actually printing all the pieces or do you have like outsourced like meeple
Uh,
creation at this point?
yeah, no. So all of that like 3D printing and the laser cutting and the manual putting together the prototypes is very like time consuming and arduous. So
Yeah,
that
I was
was
gonna
all,
say.
yeah.
It's like, oh my
That
gosh.
was all to get to a point where I could demo the game and show it off at things like FIG and PAX East and stuff before I had a copy of the game, so that I could then just get the word out there and like show people like here's a nice product that you want. Um, Once I had gotten it kickstarted and I got the funds, part of the calculation for my funding goal was, however much it costs to get a professional quality game professionally manufactured. So all the pieces are manufactured in the same place and put together and shipped out.
That's awesome. It sounds like a really lengthy like, process to kind of figure out even just like the production and assembly, like how are we gonna actually physically make this game for all the people who want to buy it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. That was one of the toughest parts and most time consuming parts, I would say, is like learning how to do all of these different things that are involved in the publishing of the game, that are things that I've never needed to know how to do, and unless I do it again in the future, I never really need to know how to do it again. Like
Right.
an example I always
Right.
bring up is like something I didn't realize is like the game was like just about ready to be printed by the manufacturer and sent out to everybody, and I said to myself, wait a second, I need a barcode. Like if it needs to be sold in stores, I need a barcode. Like how do I even get a barcode? Like is there some sort of,
I
you know
have
what I mean?
no
Like
idea. I never would have
yeah,
ever thought
there's
of
like
that.
there's all these like little nuances to like publishing a thing that you don't realize until you are in it, and then it's either you find somebody who does know those things, or you just have to kind of do a lot of your own research, and it's just a very messy, long, arduous period of learning all these things and registering with various companies and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
So now that you're at that point, now you have this a Kickstarter, you're starting to mass produce games and really get it out to people. What's next? You said you're working on an expansion, but do you have any other games in the works that you're thinking about?
Oh yeah, I probably got like 4 or 5 games that are like things I think could actually be products, and then I would say the next 3 immediate games that are like close to actually being done are the expansion for Crumbs.
Hmm.
Um, from a publishing or manufacturing standpoint, that's probably my next endeavor because Crumbs has a small fan base now. It's still fresh in people's minds. It's easier to play test because the game already exists. I already know the game works, the base game, and so adding these new components and these new game mechanics isn't as complex as starting from the ground up. So it's definitely just like I just kind of want to keep the momentum while I can, um, and develop other things which are like naturally would take longer on the side while I push this expansion, this like smaller project forward. Um, because like I said, we started designing Crumbs in 2016 and got the funding for it in 2019, and it was out to the public by 2020. So it's a long process. There's a lot of play testing to be done. Um, but yeah, other than the expansion, I have a game called Heapho, which is a similarly very like three-dimensional sort of game that is about people fighting on this island as pirates searching for buried treasure. So it's a very three-dimensional island composed of 64 wooden tiles, and everybody's like digging and moving around this island and moving the sand around, so the topography sort of undulates over time. It starts out like a flat kind of stacks of tiles, and then
Mm-hmm.
eventually it becomes this kind of ebb and flow as people dig themselves down into holes and push other people off the edge.
Oh, that's really fun.
Yeah, and then I would say the other big game I'm working on is called One of Us, and it is a very large party game for 8 to 45 players. That is,
Ooh.
it's I like to call it a social induction game rather than a social deduction game, because the whole game is surrounded by a few cult leaders trying to recruit other players into their cult. And then over the course of it, you could set this like recruitment phase for as long as you want. It could be 20 minutes, or you could set it at the beginning of the day, like at your office, and try and recruit people over the course of a typical workday. And then at the end of the workday, kind of resolve all these things that have happened. Everybody joins their respective cults and then kind of attacks each other in different ways.
Oh my gosh, that sounds really, really fun.
Yeah, I was able to play test it a few times last year, probably like 4 times with like big groups up to like 20, 23 people. And it was super successful. It's been kind of on pause due to the pandemic,
Right.
just
It's
because
hard to
of all
get
the
45 people
yeah,
together in a room right now.
exactly. And it's like of all the it was getting such good momentum, and then it was like, well, I guess I should probably focus on games that only require like 2 to 4 people. Um, so yeah, while I'm working on the expansion for Crumbs and Heapho, I'm also working on an app for One of Us. Not necessarily like a fully fledged app that everybody can use, but something that I can like send the exe file to people and like just be able to play test digitally for the amount of time being until we're able to gather again.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Um, I wanted to ask about Tabletop Simulator. Have you moved Crumbs over into Tabletop Simulator, or are you starting to?
I have,
Okay,
yeah.
awesome. Excellent.
So so I had done that when I first ran the Kickstarter because I was hoping to sort of demo the game to people who were interested in the Kickstarter. It sort of just ended up being like I put it all in there, but then it was hard to sort of coordinate, and then I was also dealing with all those like more administrative tasks of like opening a bank account, starting an
Right.
LLC for my
Yeah.
company, you know what I mean? So I just kind of
Yeah.
got lost in all those official things. And I was able to like show it off in person so much that it wasn't as necessary as I thought it would be. Obviously now during this time, to really get the word out there and to even be able to um, play the game with. So me and Jackson are working together again on the expansion, and this time I think we're seeing it through to the end, and we're getting a lot of headway. We're almost there. It's so close that I've started 3D printing the pieces for the expansion, to be able to send to like 10 to 15 blind play testers, just people who already own Crumbs, fans, people who back the Kickstarter, that kind of thing. So it's
Oh,
almost
that's
ready
so
for like
cool.
public play testing, um, which wasn't really possible at the time of Crumbs, just because there was no sort of fan base to reach out to. I definitely I play tested it and I sent it to like friends and family and stuff like that in my network. Um, but I think this expansion is the first opportunity I will have to get a true like fresh eyes on these things and be able to send it out to people I've never even interacted with before.
That's amazing. That sounds like so much fun. And it's going to be, I
Mm-hmm.
think, really useful to get that kind of feedback.
Totally, yeah. And now that they have but I guess I haven't described what the expansion is, but it's called Fowl Waterfowl.
Mm-hmm.
And its primary thing is it adds 2 new factions, the geese and the swans. So the goose faction is they are pretty aggressive, they're big, and they leave droppings behind everywhere they go, which negatively affect the score of everybody else. It's really good because they can purposely do it. They can like go somewhere and leave some droppings that negatively affect other people and then go back. Or it's just kind of a deterrent for attacking them, because if you're a big tough faction and you go and screw up the goose area, then they'll just leave a bunch of droppings behind, which it's kind of a deterrent in that way. And then the swans are actually the first faction, which have 2 different meeples. They have adult meeples, which are very large, and they're twice as strong as all the others, but there's only 2 of them. And then they have 4 little baby swans, which follow the they follow the 2 adults around everywhere. So
I can't wait to see the Signet meeples. Like, I think
actually,
that may be the first time in history anybody's made a Signet meeple.
yeah, and I that's kind of the fun of making the game, is I learn a lot. Like I didn't know that baby swans were called cygnets. I always thought they were I was just thought they were baby swans, or swanlings actually is probably the first name we called them. But yes, here you go. Luckily I was working on the game today, actually, over a call over Discord with Jackson, and we were using Tabletop Simulator to do it. So I don't know if you can see this, but this is the adult swan, and this is, wait, I'll just put him on top. This is the baby swan.
Oh my god!
So to compare that to a standard-ish size meeple, so, and also similarly, again, these are all 3D printed and hand painted. The swans are just unpainted because they're white, but I don't know if you can see it.
They're disappearing.
You know
Here,
what?
I think if you put them lower, maybe it'll. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, if you can see the geese are actually 2-toned, so they have the like signature, the Canadian or Canada goose 2-tone of the black head and the brown body. But yeah, those are the pieces that I'm working with.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So switching gears a little bit, I want to ask you, I'm asking this to everybody, what kind of advice would you have for someone who is an aspiring board game designer, board game creator, doesn't have a lot of experience, but wants to get into making these kinds of games?
Yeah, I'd say that there's a lot of things I learned that are like those. I think just do your research. You know what I mean? You just it seems overwhelming, but whenever you have a spare minute, look up how to do barcodes, and then like take some notes, so that when you do need it one day in the future, you know exactly where to go. You know, like in your free time, you can reach out to manufacturers and ask for quotes, and just to get an idea of how much your game would cost, to see if it's even viable. Because you know, you might create this game that you think is really awesome, but it ends up costing $90, like realistically to make, and like, or to sell, depending on its price to make, and like, is that realistic? And so I think doing all that kind of research really upfront will help inform the kind of design decisions you might make. It's influenced things like Heapho, where it's 64 wooden tiles and there's gold doubloons that are like metal pieces and all these things. You know, that's kind of our ideal, but being more familiar, because I've gotten quotes from manufacturers, I can kind of gauge how much those things will cost. It's like, do we really need 50 coins? Maybe just 40 coins will save us a certain amount of money, and be able to not charge X amount of dollars. And I think getting that sort of familiarity with the industry will help influence the design. Because, you know, you're not committed when you get a quote from a manufacturer. You're just listing out all the pieces you want, and they tell you how much it costs per unit, and that really like helps your understanding. It also gives you like a feel for why certain professionally published games cost what they do, and why they're designed the way they are. The other thing, I mean, I would say get a 3D printer if you can afford it. It's 5 years ago, that might be unreasonable investment for somebody just starting out doing this as like a hobby or a side thing. But I think as they've progressed, it's like you can grab one online or in Best Buy for like less than $200 sometimes, 250 maybe. And I think I mean, you can always use pieces from different games. I have actually like a board game graveyard of just like these games that I don't really like that much or are old and irrelevant, maybe like an old edition of a game like Twilight Imperium 3. You know, I sometimes use those pieces because I have Twilight Imperium 4 and I know I'm never really going to play Twilight Imperium 3. So it's part of my board game graveyard where I just kind of siphon pieces and use them to make prototypes of these games I'm designing. But I think having that, 3D printer or those other tools available to prototype is really important because what is Crumbs without the theme? I think the theme is integral, and that's, people design games in different ways. Some people design them abstractly and then apply a theme. I like to design with the theme totally embedded in the mechanics.
Yeah, it's very much like a difference between like bottom up design or top down design. And
Yeah.
and I think that makes sense. Like I'm also like a thematic designer. Like I have a theme and I build from there.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, plugs.
People can find Crumbs on the base game available on Cool Stuff Inc. or on the tidbitgames.com website. You'll be able to purchase it there directly from me. And the expansion will be on Kickstarter. I'm hoping in like 6 months, maybe more. I give myself some leeway with that. But yeah, probably everything for the foreseeable future will be on Kickstarter until my goal is to get to a point where I have a following and enough of an outreach of a voice that I don't need to rely on Kickstarter, because I think it's such a great tool for upcoming designers that I think like as soon as I can sort of move off of that platform, I would like to do that just for the sake of other designers to get to that point where I'm not relying on that sort of public funding. But yeah, Kickstarter and tidbitgames.com is my two main channels. Also, I'm most active on Instagram.
Okay, excellent. I'll get that Instagram handle from you and we'll put all those links up for everybody so everyone can find you on the web. Awesome. Great. Dylan, thank you so much for joining me and for sharing all this awesome information about your game and telling us what your design process was like. I super appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much. I really appreciate taking the time to chat.